the other day in a fall at the office. You might think I should have been in Doug's hallway yesterday. Probably a pretty scary sight. You probably all thought it'd be a cold day when you had to endure a lawyer talking to you for our Sunday message. And I think if you just look outside, there might be a few snowflakes falling, but hopefully I'll do a little bit better job than the lawyer did when he was referred to in the gospel today. As I started to prepare my talk for today, I was reminded of a quotation from Mark Twain. All you need in life is ignorance and confidence, then success is sure. Well, I'm certainly ignorant of all that it'll take for our parish to achieve its stewardship potential, but I'm equally confident that success will be obtained. Of course, how we define success is the most critical question. Perhaps you'll be surprised to hear the treasurer say that success will not be measured and should not be measured in dollars and cents. In fact, we may never know if we've achieved success in our stewardship journey. Sure, we may increase the parish's income and fund all the great work that Christ Church is called to do. We'll pay our staff fairly and equitably. We will have a physical plant that is well maintained and equipped to support our programs and provide a welcoming and inspiring place to worship. We'll have no debt. We'll provide critical support for the Diocese of Iowa and its work. We'll expand our outreach initiatives to better serve our neighborhood and beyond. In short, our bills will be paid and there'll be money in the bank. This treasurer's dream that I just described may be a million miles from success in God's eyes, if it isn't based on the most important reason of all, that we are all called to share our time, talents, and treasures with our church home. It seems that for much of my adult life, I've been involved in raising money for something: American Cancer Society, Iowa Legal Aid, Public Library, United Way, and on and on. But as I thought about it, all those efforts supported work that was critical to our community or a particular cause, but in each instance, the focus was on the needs of the organization receiving the money, and little consideration was given to whether the donors were better off for having made their gifts. If we are truly to fulfill what God has in mind for us as His people, we need to start from the premise that how each of us uses our time, talents, and treasures will have a huge impact on our relationship with God. In other words, if we are better stewards of God's gifts to us, we can't help but being drawn closer to God, because we will then more fully realize that all we have in our life comes from God in the first place. If our focus is on the needs of the parish, it is far too easy to lapse into assuming that someone else will do it, or it will allow us to make other excuses for not giving. I don't like the rector. The vestry's heading in the wrong direction. Such and such a program's a waste of time, and on and on. I suspect that is maybe why we have not achieved our true stewardship potential. We are asking the wrong question. We are making our decision on our terms, not God's. Starting from the perspective of how we can better return our time, talents, and treasures to God presents the issue of stewardship in a much different light. Instead of the question being, how much money will it take to balance the church's budget, it becomes, God has blessed me in so many ways. How is God calling me to respond to those blessings? We're all motivated by various emotions, and those emotions become particularly complex when it comes to giving to our church. I was raised a Roman Catholic, a small northwest Iowa farm community where everybody eagerly awaited the publication of that year's list of what people had paid for what we called in those days pew rent. I remember my parents spending much of Sundays spending hours that seemed to me talking about what others had or hadn't given, and feeling vindicated themselves, at least for one more year. They had done nothing to embarrass themselves or our family. Clearly, the support of their church, at least in my adolescent eyes, appeared to be driven by fear. However, over the years, as I reflected on my parents and how they raised me, I suspect that I have probably not given them their due. You see, Dad and Mom were farmers. Every year they prepared the fields as best they could, planted and tended their crops as they best knew how, and harvested the crops with a spirit of gratitude and relief. 4 or 5 months later, the cycle began anew. What has occurred to me some 50-odd years later is that the seeds that were used for the new crop had been given to them by God from last year's crop, and that ritual was repeated year after year after year. In other words, they started with what they had harvested the year before, what God had given them in that year's crop. Equally significant is the fact that many of the factors that determined whether they had a good crop or not were totally out of their control. It was God who decided when and how much it rained, how hot it got, and whether that first killing frost came too soon. My parents knew all too well that their lot in life was not the product of how hard they worked. It was the result of God's grace and providence. I suspect that same realization guided them in giving to their church, although I must admit that there must have been a bit of good old-fashioned Catholic guilt mixed in. It's that spirit of giving back what God has given me in the first place is really how I've come to define my relationship with stewardship and my approach to best using the time, talents, and treasures that God has entrusted to me. I'll admit that I'm still a bit of a works guy and frequently struggle with the faith angle. As a result, I easily lapse into thinking that if I do a few more good deeds, I'll enhance my chances of getting to heaven. If I improve my financial support to the church, I'll move up a few more rungs on the ladder to heaven. Sort of like how I approach golf. I always think if I swing a little bit harder, the golf ball will go further, but I still end up gunching more shots than I hit. What really needs to happen is that I have to step back and realize that I'm really not in control of whether I get to heaven. God's already decided that. He has promised salvation to all of us. So then you ask, well, why should I give to church? Why should we help our neighbors and needy? Obviously, we don't need to do that to get to heaven. The simple answer is that being good stewards reaffirms our awareness that all we have came from God in the first place. We honor God when we put our time, talents, and treasures to good use. Just as the crops that my parents harvested were brought about by the seeds from last year's crop and the rain and sunshine that God provided, so too are the lives we live today, are products of God's loving grace. Several years ago, a fellow parishioner loaned me a fascinating book entitled Ask, Thank, Tell. It's a wonderful book that addresses improving stewardship in a church. The author, Charles Lane, suggested 6 qualities of good stewards: give intentionally, regularly, generously, from your first fruits, proportionally, and cheerfully. In 2 Corinthians, Paul writes, the point is this: the one who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and the one who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each of you must give as you have made up your mind, not reluctantly or under compassion. Good old Paul was always plenty direct. In short, our giving to our church must be intentional, something we've thought about and committed to. Paul also teaches us what it means for us to give regularly in 1 Corinthians. On the first day of each week, each of you is to put aside and save whatever you earn, so that collections need not be taken when I come. To me, that means committing to a pledge. Every day of our lives, we're willing to sign our name to a myriad pieces of paper, all the way from signing a contract to a new cell phone or to return the carpet cleaner that we rented. God has committed to us completely and unconditionally. We can do no less in return. As you prayerfully consider the pledge card that you've received in the mail, try to think of how much you need to demonstrate to God what you are willing to commit to God. Think about how much it will cause you to reflect on the simple fact that everything that each of us has is on loan from God. Fortunately, God charges us no rent. We owe it to God to at least sign a lease. With many in our congregation not pledging at any level, we have to seriously ask ourselves, why are we not willing to make a small written commitment to God in exchange for God's unwavering and unconditional commitment to each of us every day? We're also called to give generously. The modern tithe, as it is called, is based on giving 10% of our gross income to the church and 5% to other charitable causes. I know that many of you, me included, have met this standard and more for the past several years, but none of us got to that point all at once. It took a step-by-step increase to reach that level now, and we'd never consider going back. Please make this your year to start working towards this goal. It's obvious we are far from reaching this standard as a parish. So when you look at what you gave last year as a percentage of what you made, think about increasing that by 0.25%, 0.5% each year until you reach the 5% level. We also need to practice first fruits giving. The first check we write each time we sit down to pay bills should be to Christ Church. If we don't do so, God will only get the leftovers, and we will not have given generously. Deuteronomy tells us, when you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess, and you possess it, settle in it. You shall take some of the first of all the fruits of the ground, and you shall put it in a basket into the place that the Lord your God will choose as a dwelling for his name. Proportional giving simply means to give in accordance with our means. The widow's mite is a compelling reminder to all of us that no matter how much or how little we have, we are called to give in accordance with our means. For those who have little, a percentage gift will be in proportion to their means. For those who have much, what may be a large gift in absolute dollars may be far less than an appropriate tithe. Finally, remember the teaching of 2 Corinthians. God loves a cheerful giver. If we do not start from the premise that our stewardship gifts are simply returned to God, what is God's in the first place, it will be undoubtedly difficult to be cheerful in our giving. On the other hand, if we recognize that we'll draw closer to God by simply generously returning to God what was God's in the first place, why shouldn't we give intentionally, regularly, generously, and cheerfully? There are truly important and real needs here at Christ Church that need to be funded. There's a greater need, however, and that is our spiritual need to give back to God the appropriate share of all that has been so graciously given to us. If we approach our church and our stewardship from that simple perspective, the rest will truly take care of itself. Thank you so much for your love and commitment to our church. May God's blessings be generous upon you and your loved ones. Amen. Now, just some housekeeping. If you have not already turned in your pledge card and brought it this morning, we'd ask that you put it in the offering envelope. If you lost it, the dog ate it, we'll certainly get you another one. And we may even have some downstairs afterwards. So thank you again, and we look forward to another successful stewardship campaign.